My name is George Wicks. I have the pleasure of being CTO of the Applied Research Center here in Aiken, South Carolina. And these are my notes on innovation. Well, part of my job and mission here is to take some of the technologies that were developed at the Savannah River National Laboratory in the Savannah River site, where I happen to have worked for about 40 years before retiring, and to see if we can take some of those one-of-a-kind technologies that were used to solve problems, and to take that technology another level, to tailor the technology, and to see if this taxpayer-funded research can also be used to generate either products or services that help people in our surrounding communities in our state and in our nation as well. So we get to work with cutting edge research, and we have a lot of fun doing it.
How do you identify what innovations or basic research that's come out of Savannah River? How do you identify things that potentially have an opportunity to be developed further?
What type of technologies to identify is really a good question or a good thing to think about. There are many, many different technologies. They fall into two basic classes. One of those are technologies that remain in-house because of the nature of the work. But then there's other technologies that are multi-use technologies. Not dual use, but multi-use. And that simply means that if that technology was used to and altered, it could solve not only nuclear-related problems, but perhaps could also solve other types of problems. And that's exemplified in the areas of the porous wall hollow glass microspheres that we are doing a lot of work on and are in about a dozen different areas. And also, in addition to the new types of products, there's also new kinds of processing technologies. And we have one here that's a one-of-a-kind also, and that's called hybrid microwave technology, which can do some very unusual things to materials, especially very hazardous materials. Quite a while ago, some years ago at the Savannah River National Laboratory here, we had some challenges involving the handling of tritium, a radioactive form of hydrogen. And so the existing technology simply wouldn't solve the problem. So we kind of came up with our own technology and old equipment to make the new types of materials as well. And what it involved was making tiny, tiny little glass bubbles whose diameter is roughly 1/3 the diameter of a human hair. The microspheres are glass, they are hollow inside, they can range from a few microns in diameter to 100 microns across, and the shells themselves are very thin, about 1 micron, which is about 10,000 angstroms thick. The unique feature that differentiates these microspheres from any others is the fact there's a process in glass science called phase-phase separation or spinel decomposition. We found a way through chemistry and physics of glasses to phase separate two different glass chemistries in that thin outer shell of only 1 micron, and then to orient that. Once you do that, you then can use thermal treatments and chemical treatments for stimulating it, making it larger, and then leaching it away. And when you do that, you're left with a network of little bitty holes, or I-20s, going into the microsphere that range in size from 100 to 1,000 angstroms. Since that time, we've been able to take those holes, we've been able to put things inside the microspheres, including gases, including liquids, and including solids as well. We even have ways to open and close the holes, or gate the holes as well, through certain types of processes that we've been able to develop. So once you were able to put things inside, in the case of the original problem, the original challenge we had, we put in palladium metal, and then that was able to absorb the gaseous components we had. We've done that with some others as well, and we've also grown new kinds of nanostructures on the inside of the microspheres as well. Once you have the cargo inside, we have also developed ways of releasing it on demand. We can release it all at once by external means of, say, popping the bubbles, by ultrasonics or Dopplers or other types of techniques. And then we developed other types of coatings and all that go on the outside of the nanomicrospheres for medical purposes and cancer therapy, where we can then dissolve away them very slowly, and we've got as long as a 2-week delivery of the contents, very, very slow. And for tumors, for example, that could be very, very important. If you give a big dose to the tumor, it does a good job of killing the tumor, but it unfortunately kills other stuff around it. Too slow, it means you have to go in there too many times. That's not desirable. To have something that you can mix with other materials like hydrogels, put in the opening of a tumor, block the tumor, embolize it, cut off the blood supply, cut off the oxygens, and cut off other components. But the important part is the stuff inside the microspheres can then be released very slowly. And so we have out now to about 2 weeks. That's not enough time, but it's very exciting. And in our intellectual property and patents and all, we have focused on areas, especially pediatric cancers and leukemias and lymphomas. So we're very excited about the possibility, because of ARC being here, we're able to pursue those areas. And we hope to make a difference in the lives of at least some people. We developed our own equipment to make the microspheres, and the real trick was to fill them. And so we found a new technique for filling them as well. And the interesting part is the material we put inside in that type was palladium metal. We could actually then absorb the gases of interest. And what's interesting is we started out with radioactive forms of hydrogen, as I mentioned earlier. And so later on here at ARC, what we're doing, focusing more on the next generation, non-radioactive forms, hydrogen. And what is that? Well, those are hydrogen-based vehicles. So we worked several years with Toyota, for example, have new patents with Toyota for new concepts in that particular area. You then innovatively extend it into other areas in the automotive industry. So we also work with other companies, include battery companies, new concepts in lead-acid batteries with a major company, and also new concepts in lithium-ion batteries as well. So that's how it extended. And then it extended further. We got into the areas of using the microspheres for some things that probably aren't practical, but kind of neat. Functional fabrics is a new area, if you would. We work with local companies in South Carolina to see if we can incorporate stuff to combat the Zika virus. Some very good local companies, proof of principle things only in that area. But the areas we really have focused in a great deal on has been the area of anti-counterfeiting. We were approached at a conference by some professors in South Dakota, and they put a consortium together called SPACT, Security, Printing, and Anti-Counterfeiting Technologies. And they asked if we can make these microspheres in a way that can incorporate functional materials that can be then activated. Now, why would you do that? Well, counterfeiting in the United States and the world is a $1.8 trillion industry, if it was indeed an industry. And it impacts on safety, from pharmaceuticals and medicines that are counterfeit to areas of jobs and economic benefits by not having counterfeit parts. And it also involves things like security, where you find that distributors and suppliers for our military have had counterfeit electronic parts as well. So what we've done is to take the microspheres in scoping studies, mix them with different types of security inks to develop new kinds of security inks that then, by the equipment and the technology of our colleagues in South Dakota, can then be sprayed or impacted upon a surface. And that surface contains microspheres. Some of them contain cargoes that if you try to wipe them out, it releases it. Others will take cargoes that you can activate, if you know what they are, by external means to actually show numbers or a print as well. So we have some intellectual property in prosecution in that particular area. Other areas as well, that's extended to a brand new field as well. That could be very important. Everybody has heard of nanotechnology, nanostructures, conferences. You get dozens of invites to that and all. But this part of it that's been missing by most of the experts, at least in my opinion, and that's what we call nanonothingness. And we've sort of specialized in nanonothingness. And the point is that if you can control the porosity of a material on a nanoscale, like the structure on a nanoscale, it affects the properties tremendously. That's what we've seen. So we here at ARC have specialized in nanotechnology nanonothingness or nanoporosity. And we find that's an important part of almost any of these different projects that we've been part of. So that is really critical. When you control it on that scale, you can make them in filters, you can make them passageways for filling different things, you can open and closing on. And we've done other things, like actually putting things to it to couple together the singly bonded oxygens in the holes to produce new kinds of nanostructures within the holes, and there's a patent on that one as well. So it's kind of really neat, this nano-nothingness that sort of is something that we have a lot of fun with.
How long have you all been working on this now?
Originally on Microspheres was probably 10 years ago, but it stayed in the complex and was not in public for probably 3-4 years. About 10 years ago, we had our first allowed publication, appeared on a cover of a magazine, and in it was saying that this is technology that is breakthrough technology in the fields of security, environmental remediation, and medicine. And then the phone started ringing off the hook. And I was thinking it might be people that wanted to partner with us and had money. 99% of those phone calls was people that wanted free samples. So that didn't quite work out the way we were hoping. But we then developed a little bit more in some other areas. But I can honestly say that even though we trained people before we retired on doing this, a lot of young people are more mobile. Not too many people spend 40 years at a single facility anymore. But the technology, in my opinion, would have died, been completely over. And fortunately, the Applied Research Center is a facility that Fred Humes has put together, and it is just very special to people that do research. Not only research, but also education, where you get a chance to work and mentor with students from literally around the country. That first year that we said, well, we may take some students on, we had students writing us from, I think it was 3 of them from China, from India, even Iraq, and of course, United States. We focused on the US ones here for various reasons, but we only take on a few students each time. But we work with the students, trying to impart on them how to do research, how to do planning of research, how to get results and all. We also sponsor and work with people that come to us working on their masters. We've had 2 master's theses. We had PhD thesis students from South Dakota to Virginia Tech to Idaho to University of South Carolina. And we have folks, actually we had one Nigerian student, very bright young man. That young man, by the way, had a photographic memory. And working with an old goat like me, where I can't remember I put my car keys the day before, that was a very interesting work period, to say the least. So really bright kids. We sponsor capstone programs. It's one of the best things that I've seen in a lot of college programs, especially those accredited. And what this is a team of 3 and 4 seniors in colleges that do a project for a year, about a year. And so we would have weekly Skype calls with them, and they do just a great job. So it's a great tool for education, passing on knowledge of not just microspheres, but on how to do research. But it's a great tool also for researchers to be able to take technology the next step. One other thing I want to make a point of is that with Fred and the Economic Development Partnership, which is such a critical part of what we're doing, those of us that are in the science field feel pretty good about our field, but we're pretty dumb when it comes to business, let me tell you. And so starting business is something we're finding out a lot about. And so we have a business arm with that, with Fred, and we have some of the business leaders in our communities that sit on the board overseeing a lot of the work. So it's a complete package, and it makes it a lot of fun to come into work. A very important part on new technologies is to be able to have intellectual property protected. And what we have done is use a little different approach than a lot of people. We have an IP portfolio itself of patents, but we have coupled that strategy with trade secrets, so that trade secrets are never written down anywhere. No country can see them. They're not in the literature and all. So we felt that when you have something that's one of a kind, and we have a couple one of a kind things here, that is in the best interest of not just ARC, but of the United States, that your new technology to best protect it is to couple the patent protection, which is limited, I will tell you that, with that of trade secrets, number 1 point. Second point is we now put together portfolios of patents we've done in the past. I don't know, a couple dozen patents somewhere around there, and probably a dozen in the microsphere area of that here on it, with a brand new patent that was just issued 2 weeks ago. And ARC is part of that. The Savannah River National Laboratory was part of that signing, and also was the old Medical College of Georgia, now Augusta University. And then the three founders of a private company, a spin-out company called Spheresville, of which I'm part of that one as well. But they're involved 2 doctors, physicians, including a surgeon. So we have put all the parties together, and we work with an interdisciplinary and a really good team in what we're doing. But protecting the intellectual property is absolutely critical in promulgating technology today. To do big changes in technology, it's not just teamwork, it's something more important. It's interdisciplinary teamwork. So in the case of the medical thing that we just discussed here, we have people that are medical researchers, we have end users that are surgeons that are doing it, we have materials people as well. In other areas, we couple with chemists, we couple with modelists and others also. But the real critical aspect of putting together these teams is to basically, my dad used to be a carpenter, and he used to always say, you measure twice, cut once. Well, in science, you better plan very carefully your experiments, unless you got unlimited budgets, and to make sure that you can get done what you do. So you put together Gantt plots or modifications, you put together timelines, you put together monthly spend-out plans, and when you have students that are with you for an internship, 10 to 12 weeks only, they have 3 or 4 projects, and everyone completes them. Plus, some of them have journal publications as well. So you've got to plan it out with the milestones that take place that are very, very important, and the deliverables. So planning is really, really important in that particular area.
Are there any indispensable tools that you have that you cannot live without?
The one thing that's absolutely critical, number one, is the team. You've got to have the right people, and each person brings something to the table in order to make the product even better. So you don't start on something unless you have the right people involved, and I call that strategic alliances a lot of time. So that's the first step you do. This next step you do in conducting the research and getting to the product thing is to plan it out. And unfortunately, that's probably not done as much as it should be. But I think it's really important to think of all of the alternatives that you have here, plan out what you want to do, and then to use all the tools you have available. And those you don't have available, you can either outsource or subcontract out as well. So we have a basic tool here. When I first started and Fred asked me about working here, and I was really hesitant to go back into the workplace after 40 years. I figured I deserved a break here and all. He said, well, George, these are your labs here if you come here. I said, well, Fred, there's nothing in there. They're closets right now. He said, well, you put what you need in there. And so I said, okay. I said, but there's a number of things. And he said, well, what is it? I said, well, one of the things is a good microscope, a scanning electron microscope. No problem, we'll do that. But what it is an instrument we have that you'll see that is really extraordinary compared to what I've used before. This is a 8230 Hitachi. It's the most advanced system in the southeast portion of the United States. And Fred has set this up not only to help us in our research, but other people from the national lab use it because it's better than I ever saw it in the national lab as well. And industry can use it on a user basis as well. And so to me, one of the basic tools is doing it. You have the fundamental tools of making measurements, weights, shaking things down. You have optical microscopy as well. And this year we'll be getting some brand new equipment that can measure nanoporosity as well, which we're kind of excited about because that will tell us a whole lot more. And some things that we don't have, we can subcontract out to be done. And that supplements what you do. So to me, number one is a team. Also with that is a support system and the resources that are necessary. And you have to sometimes run around a little bit. At ARC here, we've been really fortunate. They have been taking care of us to a very large part. Well, I think if you look at the definitions of some of the leaders, Steve Jobs, that you've used on your web pages, and Bill Gates and all, I kind of like what my granddaughter uses, and that's Walt Disney. You know, if you can dream it, you can build it or make it as well here. But innovation to me is maybe looking things a little differently than other people look at it. And what I mean by that, let's take an example. many years now, they developed glass fibers called e-glass. And e-glass has been developed and used for insulators, for reinforcing, meaning others. And you have a field over here involving glass fibers. There's now new compositions, incremental changes in the technology, new uses. Each year something else happens to it. That's good science, and there's some innovation in it, but it's not really the type of innovation that I think we'd all like to see more of. And say you have a box over here. These are totally different people in another world. They're polymer chemists and all. They develop epoxies, thermosets, used in a million products in our everyday lives, and every year more and more uses of it. Great contributions, really good science going on, a lot of innovation as well. However, somewhere along the line, somebody thought of what happens now if we take the epoxy and we add the glass fibers to it. Well, what happens is you don't just get the properties of the two, you get totally new properties. And that's the field of composite materials that we really emphasize a lot. Those composite materials, when you do that, form a product you're familiar with called fiberglass. So now you have a concept that literally and figuratively holds water. That's an example, in my judgment, of innovation. You know, I think the single word that I never hear used in science, which to me is critical, is passion. You really gotta believe, and it might be kind of idealistic, but you gotta really believe that what you're doing is not just writing papers, getting patents, and giving talks and invited talks, a nice ego trip, but what you're doing has a chance, at least, of impacting the lives of the people around you. And I really, really believe we have that potential. And so getting into these areas and working, especially in the medical area, you see it perhaps more clearly. And so I never had the problem of running down in that regard, or passion and all. I have the problem overextending sometimes as well here. But I think it's a personal thing to a lot of people. But best scientists I know of are people that are more interested in the results, how to use the results, and how that other people can profit from them. And so we kind of like to have that as part of our game plan. I'm adjunct professor to several universities. And so what we are able to do at ARC, again, what Fred has set up this environment, is that they also get something they don't get at the universities. Okay? And what they get is one-to-one contact in a laboratory, but also we have lots of visitors coming through. I mentioned about the middle school teachers, the STEM program, 161 year in all, but we also have congressional delegations coming through. We have businesses coming through. Every one of our students is required to give a talk, and it's like a 3-minute talk or 5-minute talk, and it's funny to see them start out, and they're very uncomfortable, to say the least. And to watch them progress is really quite extraordinary. Communications is not one of the strong points of U.S. colleges today. And so what we do is we try to help out not only in the oral part and also making opportunities for them to give talks at meetings, but also in the written part. And boy, I tell you, I just take a red pen on what is done. And so they get to learn what things like cherry boxes are, executive summaries. They get to learn the facts of life in the real world. Like if you don't say what you want to say in your 40-page report on the first page, you've lost your manager right off the bat here. So you got to get up front, and a report is much different than a journal publication. So we try to bring that to them as well, and we've had great responses from the students, and especially from the universities as well. And so we serve, as I said, on a couple advisory boards, but also with students and some of their efforts on improving some of the programs. One of the real nice parts about ARC, as I mentioned, is an educational facility as well as research. And that's really important to have the one-on-one contact with students that take place. Actually, it started with the students, and when I mentioned earlier to you, we had letters one year inundated when people read our publications and papers, simply asking if they can work with us. How do we do that? How can we come there? How can we do a summer employment and all? And we didn't have a program then. We had a team member that has passed, unfortunately, called Joette Sonnenberg, and she was a really good scientist, and she started putting the procedures students together to allow students to come in here, wrote the textbook. So we had to start out with basically a text, if you would, of all the rules, the regulations. We had to make new procedures, safety rules, things of that nature. Fred not only allowed us, he pushed us to say this is indeed what we want to do. And Fred got a hold of where he works at University of South Carolina, Aiken, a great facility, and set up a deal there where we have the students coming, and we have a special deal where we can put them up in the summertime in the dorm rooms that are not being used, especially, where they can be people their own age and be at a university instead of hanging out with a bunch of old fogies all the time. And so we have students coming here. Every student, I think, has been at my house for dinner at least once here, just to welcome him into this area. They can hang out with some of their own folks and all. They get to meet everybody. I think almost every group, we also had talked to our board of directors of their work before they left as well. So when students want to work here, you get messages from them, letters from them as well. And we look at these things, we try to spread it out a little bit. We're kind of snowed under, we're limited a little bit in our workforce that we have here, our resources. So we'll take on usually 2 or 3 students on a summer on those students. They're recommended sometimes by their professors. So I'll get a professor giving me a call saying, hey, George, do you think you can, I have this guy that's really good here and I'd like to learn a little bit more about material science in this area. Can you help me out here, take him and all? That's another way that it happens. So for students that want to work here that are in colleges, going through their professor is a good way. Sometimes we get direct letters from them. So those are the students. And then the professors get a hold of us when they have students doing studies on master's or PhD thesis. For example, we have a Virginia Tech student who did his master's with us, and basically what he was doing is trying to give us more information in the mechanical integrity of the microspheres. And so he took one of the machines at Virginia Tech here, and it was an indenter, and basically outfitted it, not with a point, but with a flat plate about the order of 100 microns, and then had a technique with a microscope and could film it, where you could separate out the microspheres and actually pop each bubble separately. Now, when you do that, and you do a whole lot of bubbles, you do what's called a Weinberg analysis, and you get probability of fracture. So there's some very creative ways and all. He was able to do a complete master's thesis on the mechanical integrity of the glasses. And that helps us because we're going to be filling them, we're going to put coatings on them. It's nice to have a tool that doesn't exist to measure that as well. He now is going on with his PhD thesis. Another student that came from South Dakota was interested in filling them with first gold nanoparticles, but then also with copper chlorides and copper oxides. And this was part of the anti-counterfeiting one. So the professor asked if maybe he can come here, did just a great job, did a nice job on it, finished his thesis. So we have both the theses of these folks, and now is doing his PhD work as well in the same area. So talking to professors that can be helpful. Just simply writing a letter. Fred Humes is our CEO, going through Fred, and then it gets to me afterwards. And also, as I may have mentioned already, but the capstone programs are really important. And what needs to happen is more industry, by the way, and people that are in our situation need to partner more with universities and to share what they have with universities, because there's some missing elements in the educational program of students today, I believe anyway. And I find universities are extremely receptive to something like that. So we have a mutually beneficial thing take place on it. So those are some of the ways to do that.
Did you know when you were a youth that you wanted to be a scientist?
Not really. I knew I was interested in science. I was better at taking things apart than putting them back together again as I grew up here. As I grew up, I actually, believe it or not, at one time was in athletics quite heavy, and that's why I was able to go to college, was because of athletics. I couldn't afford it otherwise. But as you get in and you take different courses and you do different things, I just think science is so exciting. The young people today are just so much brighter than I was growing up, to be honest with you. We didn't have tools like internets. I talk to our students on a daily basis a lot, and when I talk about a slide rule, you know, it's like a museum piece where all of us had it on our sides that we would have to do. I do think there's no substitute for the work ethic, however. And so while there's tons of people that are probably a whole lot smarter than people like myself, I make it a policy that not too many people outwork me in a task that's going on. So I think there is no substitute for that. So I expect students to work hard. I expect them to be in before the time, stay later if necessary, put in their own time if they really enjoy what they're doing. And when you do science, you think about it 24/7 sometimes. When I get home and I get up in the morning at 6 in the morning, I put on the TV, I put on my computer, and I'm working. I'm starting, and I'm retired, which means I did a really bad job in retiring, I guess. I'm George Wicks, and those were my notes on innovation.